Okay, following on from the PowerPoint presentation where I showed you how to add on, how to create a yoke and and have gathers. So once again I'm using the dartless block. There's no darts in this one, so I've drawn around it already on paper and I've cut it out. So I'm now going to mark in where I want the yoke to be. I've marked in the centre front, as you can see here. That's vital, you added that onto every pattern. So it's entirely up to you where you want the yoke to sit on this. There's no darts, there's nothing to complicate where the yoke should be. So I'm just marking in with a nice smooth curve. I'm going to make this yoke slightly curved. Mark in the centre front. So what I'm going to do now is cut this. So that's my yoke. But I need to create gathers. Now, as you can see, remember from the PowerPoint, as you remember from the PowerPoint presentation, I've got to split the pattern and actually open it out. So first of all, I'm going to work out where I'm putting my gathers. So I think I'm going to put little notches in here. I'm going to put my gathers in this area. So I'm going to split this section of the pattern out to create extra fullness for my gathers. Now let me just measure the distance between these notches, and it's 10 centimetres. So the common practice, if you're adding gathers to something, is have a ratio of 2 to 1 with the gathers. So that's 10 centimetres, and I want to add another 10 centimetres in there of volume into the lower section of this to give me enough fabric to gather, basically. So I'm moving that out of the way, and I'm just going to draw a straight line. And this is the section I'm going to split and add extra gathers. I'm going to split it into, I'm going to draw 3 lines. Now they're not all even, as you can see. You can make them even, but it doesn't really matter. So what I'm doing here, I'm cutting up each one of these lines. Section 1. Section 2. Right. So what I need to do is spread these out so that in total, in these areas, I've got 10 centimetres. So I'm going to get another bit of paper here, and I'm going to lay it on top. Start off by drawing a line across the bottom, so we've got a nice straight bottom on this. In this garment, so I'm drawing a little line across the bottom here. And I'm just sticking down my first section. As you can see, you use a lot of masking tape and pattern cutting. So I'm spreading these out so I've got in fullness, with each one of these sections added together, they'll add up to 10 centimetres. So I'm approximately going to have 3 1/3 there. Just adding on the bits. Yep. So I'm going to split again another 3.3 again, approximately. Doesn't have to be that exact, it could be, you can add a little bit extra fullness if you want. The more fullness the better, but the common practice on something like gathers is about a ratio of 2 to 1. So here we go, is that 3 centimetres apart? You know what, it's a wee bit more, but sure I like to have lots of, I like nice full gathers, so I'm going to have that one a wee bit more, I think. So, now can you see how jagged it is at the top now? So what I want to do here is take my pattern master and I can draw it with a straight line, which is, and the curves in the pattern master is not great. So I'm going to do a nice gentle curve. Okay, so you can see they're all a bit jaggy sticking up here. My lovely pattern master's not giving me a lovely curve. I could do a nice gentle curve freehand, or I could use my very curve that I have here, and that will give me a much nicer curve. So it needs to be a nice smooth gentle curve. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing across that and cutting it out. Okay, so I've cut out this. Need to make sure my notches match here. So I'm marking my notch here. Okay, and I'll knot my notch there. I've got to put my notches in before I forget. So I'm going to notch properly. So, here we go. So I now know that between the notches it's 10 centimetres here on the yoke. So obviously this is larger, so I now know that I need to gather that section in there, which I'm going to just there, which is actually 20 centimetres, into 10 centimetres, and then I can sew the two pieces together. And you're now going to see me sewing that. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to gather onto the yoke. I've cut in the little notches, but I've highlighted them with a red Sharpie pen so that you can see them. I've got the same little notches here on the yoke. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to gather all this fabric here into the length that's going to fit onto the yoke. Right, we know that the distance between these two notches is 10 centimetres approximately, because that's what's in the pattern. So I've now got to gather that in to 10 centimetres to match up with that. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and I'm going to increase the size of the stitch on my sewing machine. If you're doing this in university, you increase it probably you increase it maybe up to 5. And now I'm not going to back tack. I'm going to do 2 rows of stitching. So here's the first row of stitching, which is 5 millimeters from the edge. And I'm going to take it out of the machine. Okay, that's my first row of stitching. Because the fabric's so fine, it's actually gathering it already. Then I'm doing a second row, and it's going to be located about 2 millimeters from the first row. So I'm just stitching again. Approximately 2 millimeters from the first row. Okay, and I'm taking it out of the machine. Again, I just slightly gathered it because the fabric's so fine. So what I'm doing, I'm now taking the ends of these pieces of thread and I'm going to pull them in, both of them together, pulling them in such a way that I make my gathers nice and neat. And I'm going to pull it in until it's 10 centimetres between the two notches. And gosh, that is 10 centimetres. But I'm going to make sure my gathers are beautiful and neat and nice and even. I don't want any bunches amongst all this. So between the notches here, yeah, 10 centimetres. So I'm going to change the stitch size back on my machine to a standard stitch size. And here I've got my armhole, and here I've got the armhole and the yoke. So what I'm doing is, remember it's right sides together, and I'm taking my pins, and again, as you know, I pin everything with the pins at right angles to the edge of the cloth. So I'm pinning it here. Making sure that right notch on top of notch, bringing that around. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm actually sewing with the gathers on the top of that. I'm looking at the gathers uppermost, so that whenever I'm sewing this with, again I'm taking a centimetre seam because that's what's in my pattern. Okay, so I've now got the gathered section on the top here. I don't want that where I can't see it. So I'm sewing with a centimetre seam because that's what I'm back tapping. Some people say you can't sew over pins. You can sew over pins. I'll take them out. And here I am, I'm coming up, I'm taking out the pins as I go here. So what I do here, I want to actually make sure the gathers are not all bunched up. So I'm straightening them out, I'm making them so they don't end up being a whole pile of little pleats. So I'm making sure we haven't any dodgy tucks and things across this little yoke here. I'm straightening it out with my fingers as I go. Okay. Just trim away all those horrible big red long threads. Okay, make sure I'm straightening out. I want to have nice little gathers and no bunches. And I'm coming up and I'm sewing to the end of the yoke here. And I'm just running off. So now there is my yoke, and with the gathers you can see there are no bunches on them at all. Okay, so that's how to gather a piece of cloth and how to sew it onto a yoke. And here you can see the yoke with the gathers over the bust. And you can see they're nice and even gathers, they're not all bunched up, or we didn't have loads of pleats in the gathers. And now you should know how to insert inverted pleat into a yoke and how to attach to gather a piece of fabric and then sew it on to the yoke.